off the celebration. So if anybody wants to gather around for our first presentation, move your booties this way, please. All right. My name's Christy. I'm the president of San Francisco Vegan Society. I've been the president for the past 6 years, and this is my 7th year organizing the event, so quite experienced with it. But it is also my last year organizing the event because I will be retiring. But I am leaving the organization in very good hands. We're going to have co-presidents, Lane and Hillary. You will see them throughout the event today. Lane's going to be at the silent auction table, and Hillary is working the chef zone. So make sure and tell them hello, introduce yourselves, and congratulate them as being the new co-presidents. So they'll be taking over when I retire at the end of the year. So we're doing a transition period after the event today. But I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. If this is your first one, if this is your second one, if this is your 25th one, if you've been to all 25 of these bad boys, then that's pretty awesome, I think. Also, just a reminder that we are not only the oldest, one of the oldest veg fests in the United States of America, we are also the Bay Area original Veg Fest. We were the very first one in the Bay Area, and we're the only one in the Bay Area that is 100% non-profit. We're all volunteers. This is all volunteer run. None of us get paid to be here today. We just do this for the love of spreading veganism and welcoming everybody into veganism and letting them know how exciting and wonderful and life-changing our movement is. So thank you all so much for being here today, and I'm going to hand it over to our morning MC, who's also a board member, Rachel.
Hey, good morning. I hope people can hear past the screen and will know to come up, as we have our first speaker coming up, and I think you're really going to want to hear from him. Mohan Gurunathan, I hope that's okay. Mohan is going to give a presentation called Earth on Your Plate, How Diet Change is Essential to Saving Our Planet. And Mohan is an engineer, entrepreneur, activist, expert on food systems sustainability, and he serves as an advisor and on the board, as a board member for numerous nonprofit and animal advocacy organizations. I am particularly interested to hear about his work in Mountain View, where he has been very influential in shaping environmental policy. So very excited to hear from Mohan. Mohan's going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A, which I will moderate. So please do give him a warm welcome with a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. I'm going to start you off with a joke. So how many vegans does it take to change a light bulb? How many? 0. The vegan world is full of light. You don't need light bulbs. Sorry, that was a corny one. But I'm a dad, so I do a lot of dad jokes. So the title of my talk today is The Earth on Your Plate, Why Diet Change is Essential to Save the Earth. So let's get right into it. So as you know, can everybody see the screen? Our home is on fire. Everybody know about this? It's no surprise to anybody, right? What am I talking about? What's the crisis that I'm talking about here? What do we call it? The climate crisis, right? That's, you turn on the radio, the news, go on the internet, we hear a climate crisis, global warming, climate change. But to be honest, they're really not telling you the full story. That really sells the picture short. It's as if you had a man who is in multiple system organ failure and goes to the hospital, and he says, "What's wrong with me?" And they do a bunch of tests, and they say, "You have lung cancer." So they cure his cancer, but the man dies anyway because they didn't address all of the problems. So when we say climate change, it's like saying you have lung cancer. We're ignoring a whole bunch of problems. So what's a better word for what's going on? Well, I think of it as multi-system planetary crisis. We really need to start thinking of it this way. So if we want to solve it, we need to understand the full nature of the problem, okay? So what are these multiple systems that I'm talking about? So let's talk about that. So imagine, metaphorically, climate change is one fire we have to put out. How many other fires do we have to put out? There are at least 6 other fires we have to put out. What are these 6 fires? Let's talk about that. So how many of you have heard of the planetary boundaries? It's a very important concept that unfortunately not enough people know about or are talking about. But this is based on a scientific study from a group in Sweden. And it's a group of scientists who went out to determine what are the key systems on the planet we need to safeguard to ensure a livable planet in the future. And they came up with 9 of them. Okay, so climate change is one of them, and I'll go over what the other 8 are. So the other 8 are going counterclockwise from climate change. Can you all read that somewhat? It's a little small. Biosphere integrity, biodiversity is the next one, next to climate change. Next to that is deforestation or land system change. Next to that is fresh water. We of course need fresh water. Next to that is organic pollution, the pollution that comes from things like farms, okay? We're coming up on the right side now. Ocean acidification is the next one. Then atmosphere aerosols, which is like atmospheric pollution. We have the ozone layer, and the final one is chemical pollution, what they call novel entities. So according to this study, we need to safeguard all 9 of these areas if we're going to ensure that the planet is survivable for us and all other species going forward. So in addition to defining the 9 categories, they define what they call a safe operating space. And what we're going to do is we're going to put pie wedges in each of these categories, and we're going to see if they stay inside of the safe operating space. If they're inside the safe operating space, we're doing okay. So they went in and did an assessment, and this is what they found. Pretty scary. We have 6 issues where we are outside the safe operating space. Any one of these issues could end life on Earth as we know it. How are we going to solve this? We just took one problem of climate change, and we said there's actually 6 of them. Seems hopeless, right? Makes you feel a little depressed. But let's talk about it from a solutions point of view. How are we going to solve these 6 problems? Well, the first step to solving a problem is understanding what is the root cause. Okay, so I'm an engineer. That's the way we solve problems. You understand what's causing it, so then you can address it. So let's talk about what are humans doing to cause these 6 problems, okay? The first one, let's look at climate change. We know fossil fuel burning is a key driver of climate change. But agriculture is another secondary major driver of climate change, okay? Let's look at biodiversity loss. The main cause of biodiversity loss on the planet is tearing down natural ecosystems. And the main reason we're doing that is for agriculture. The main cause of deforestation, again, is for agriculture. I think you see a pattern forming here. The main cause of freshwater usage is agriculture. The main cause of organic pollution is agriculture. And the main cause of chemical pollution is related to both fossil fuels and agriculture. But let's say if you're in charge of the planet or you're the advisor for the president, what single issue would you tell the president we have to address? Is it fossil fuels? Is it energy production? No, it needs to be agriculture, but we are not talking about it. We're not talking about it. We're not doing anything about it. And the biggest issue, well, let me re-emphasize this. There is nothing humans do on Earth that affects the planet as much as growing food. That is the primary footprint of humanity on the planet, is growing food. And there's nothing we can do to save the planet better than to reform the way we do agriculture, what we grow and what we consume. Now, when it comes to, we all have to eat. We all can't stop eating. We can't ask everybody to go on a diet. What's the one thing we can do? Change what we eat, okay? So it turns out the single most powerful thing any person can do to change their footprint on the Earth, to reduce their footprint on the Earth, is avoid meat, dairy, and eggs. How many of you are aware of this? I think I'm talking to a pretty educated crowd here, okay? So a lot of what I'm telling you, you may already know. Maybe you'll learn, hopefully you'll learn a few new things that can help you in sharing this information with others, okay? I'll tell you, when I didn't grow up as a vegan or a vegetarian. I grew up eating hamburgers and chicken nuggets and pizza and ice cream like all kids who are pretty much grow up here. And I didn't learn about this until my 30s. And it was a shock to me because we don't teach this. We don't teach our kids about this. There's nothing more fundamental than what we put in our bodies and how it affects the planet, but it's not taught. It's not taught in schools. And it was a rude shock to me when I started learning all of this. But once it took me about a year to really fully understand the implications. I realized I need to change, and the world needs to change. And that's what eventually got me to speaking to people about this. because I don't think things are going to change unless we educate each other and we work together. A question for all of you. How many of you use solar energy? I see 2. How many of you don't use solar energy? Are you sure? You're sure about that? Your body uses solar energy, exactly. It's a trick question, okay? All of us are using solar energy. I'm using solar energy right this minute. We don't think of it that way. We don't have solar panels attached to ourselves, right? But we all run on solar energy. So let's talk about how do we get solar energy into our bodies. It is through, obviously, what? What we eat, what we consume. And so let's talk about the biology of this, okay? The way this works, if you remember back to high school or middle school biology class, the sun powers plants through photosynthesis, and plants absorb that energy and they turn it into chemical energy. And that chemical energy is what powers all life on Earth. And those could be plants or phytoplankton, but they're at the base of the food chain. Now, you're all familiar with the food chain? So those plants contain the chemical energy that's eaten by herbivores. The herbivores are eaten by other animals, and there are several layers to the top of the food chain. And this is what we call a trophic cascade, or sometimes just called the food chain. Now, there's a very specific reason why this is usually depicted as a triangle, right? If you think of it as a food chain, why isn't it just like a ladder? Boom, boom, boom. Anybody know? What gets smaller as you go to the top? The energy that's available gets smaller. So there's an interesting thing in biology called the 10% law. When you go from one level of the food chain to the next level above it, only 10% of the energy carries forward. 90% of the energy is lost to the environment. And that's something that should be taught in schools, but it's really not, because it's super important. Now, let me explain this in a more intuitive way. When you eat food, you don't use all of that food to grow your body. You use a lot of it, you expend a lot of it, you burn a lot of it in metabolism. A lot of it gets excreted in your waste products, right? So the 90% is lost to your metabolism, to your motion, to your waste products, and only about 10% adds to your biomass that, if you were a squirrel, only 10% gets eaten by the fox. And only 10% of what the fox eats is available to the mountain lion, for instance. So going up the food chain is an extremely inefficient, lossy process. Okay, this is really important. Does this make sense to everybody? So this is fundamental to understanding why we need to eat close to the base of the food chain if we want to sustain the population. So let me explain that with another diagram. Imagine the world was vegan. Everybody was plant-based. Okay? If I were to draw this food chain or food pyramid diagram, you would see something like this. You have 8 billion humans at the top, and you have all the plants we use that we grow to feed humanity. Now, imagine we all woke up one day and became carnivores. What would change in this diagram? How would we change it? We still need 8 billion humans, right? We still have 8 billion humans. Those humans now are eating animals, and those animals have to be fed plants, right? What happened? What happened to the amount of food we have to grow? It got multiplied by 10 because we have a 90% loss at each chain, right? So you get 90%, you get 10 times more farmland required, 10 times more water, fertilizer. So all the inputs get multiplied by 10, and all the waste products get multiplied by 10. The manure, the emissions, everything gets multiplied by 10 in the waste stream as well. And fundamentally, if you understand this, you're going to understand pretty much everything else I'm going to talk about, because this is why eating animals or animal products is so inherently inefficient. Because the inputs get multiplied by 10 and the outputs get multiplied by 10. And we're not talking about 10%, 10 times, right? 1,000% more. And the problem is, as humans, as we get more prosperous, there's a pattern towards wanting to be at the top of the food chain, eat more animal products. The fact is, we don't have enough land or water or inputs on Earth to feed 8 billion people who are eating meat, dairy, and eggs 3 times a day. We can't sustain it. We would need multiple planet Earths to do that. And we don't have any checks in place to stop people from doing this, right? It has to be a voluntary process, and the only way we can do that is through education. Now, the 10% law is a rough approximation. It varies depending on the animal and lots of other conditions. So I'm going to give you some numbers. Cattle are by far the most inefficient. We put in about 25 units of protein they eat from plants, and we get back 1 unit of edible protein for humans. So 96% of the inputs are lost, right? And remember that 96% turns into manure, to methane, to carbon dioxide, all the waste products. For pigs, they're slightly less inefficient. We put in about 10, we get 1 back. And for chickens, we have optimized them through breeding and engineering them to be a little bit more efficient, but it's still 4 to 1, 4.5 to 1, okay? What does this mean? If you go out and buy a hamburger, like millions of people do every day without a second thought, the resources that went to produce that hamburger could have grown 25 plant-based meals. We could have fed 25 families, or 25 people, right? Multiple families, 5 or 6 families we could have fed with the resources that went to 1 hamburger. But we think nothing of going and buying a hamburger and eating it. And in fact, Americans eat 50 billion hamburgers per year. So you can imagine the level of waste we're talking about, the amount of inputs that we're talking about, the land, water, energy, all of that. It's staggering. If you look at the land use impacts of food choices, this is a graph, it's hard to read probably, but at the top you have beef, and that's organic beef. And this is the amount of land it takes to grow 100 grams of protein of different types of food. Now, every food category is the same amount of protein here. So compare everything below the line, the plant-based foods, to everything above the line. You can see it's dramatically higher when you go to the plant-based foods. Almost 100 to 1 in some cases. Okay, I want to put you on a time machine. Let's go back in time 1,000 years. 1,000 years is, in geological and evolutionary timescales, it's a blink of an eye. It's not very long. And what would the planet look like if you landed on a continent somewhere? You would probably see forests. More than half the planet was forested, okay? You would see abundant wildlife. You'd see clean water. You'd see vegetation everywhere, and you'd see an ocean that's teeming with life, okay? Now I'm going to bring you back to the present day. If I drop you in the same land somewhere, what would you see? You'd probably see this. Now, anybody who's been in an airplane has seen this, right? But I'm not sure you all appreciate how much of the planet has been turned into this. So I have a little video I want to show you. Let's see if it'll play. Can everybody see that? So you can see how we've turned vast swaths of the planet into this checkerboard quilt of farms and pastures. And almost anywhere in the Midwest you go, it is almost continuous checkerboard of farms and pastures. Now, 1,000 years ago, this was all forested. And we've torn down all of these forests for farms. Now, this land use conversion is unfortunately something we don't account for in a lot of our climate models. So we don't account for historical deforestation for farming, but we really should, because imagine if we got rid of these farms and we let the forest grow back. Imagine how much carbon we would capture. But that's not included in our climate change models, unfortunately. And if you go to California, you look at the Central Valley or look at Sonoma County, you see the same thing. Just almost continuous blanket of farms and pastures. So let's quantify this a little bit. There was a study done about how land is used in the United States, and they accumulated all the land for a given purpose. And what you can see, the single largest user of land in the United States is for cow pasture, for grazing cows, by far. And one of the second largest is to grow livestock feed, which is soy and corn to feed livestock. So that's about 41% of the United States land area is used to grow food for animals. Now compare that to where we grow all of the food that we eat, like the rice and the beans and the vegetables and the legumes. It's a relatively small area. If we're growing food to feed people directly, it doesn't take a lot of land. The same analysis has been done on the world scale. So you can see the red area. Now, obviously, this is equivalent land area. So the red area, about 27% of the planet's land is used to grow food for animals, either grazing land or feed crops. Compare that to the remaining forests. So we have more lands that we're growing food for animals than we have forests remaining. And a lot of that land used to be forested. Now compare that to what we grow all human crops on, only 7% of the Earth's land. And in fact, that red land, if everybody went plant-based, we could reduce that by a factor of 10, roughly. So imagine how much we could allow nature to repopulate the Earth if we simply did that. How many animals do we kill for food per year? Anybody? Let's go land animals. Anybody know the numbers? About 80 billion, okay? 8 billion humans, and we kill 80 billion. Who do you think is eating all the food? Who do you think is making all the waste? We have far more farm animals than we do people on this planet. And that's something you don't recognize because you don't see them. They're not out in the street. They're trapped in factories. They're trapped in slaughterhouses, factory farms, where we don't see them, okay? How about marine animals? More or less? More? You're right. 1 to 3 trillion. Okay. So unfathomable numbers. And if you even assign them the slightest bit of importance to their suffering, to their consciousness, their well-being, the amount of pain and suffering we cause it's immeasurable. We can't even wrap our arms around it, right? But in addition to that, we are simply running out. The ocean cannot replace marine animals as fast as we are killing them. And we're headed towards lifeless oceans in about 20 years if we keep it up at this rate. Okay. Now, because of the explosion of inputs and the explosion of waste products, animal agriculture causes many, many different problems. It's arguably the most destructive industry on Earth, though it rarely gets recognition for that. It's responsible for all of these problems in some measure. In some cases, it is the leading cause of these problems. I'm going to go through a few of them in a little more detail. So first, climate change. We know climate change is happening. We talk about it all the time. We say we're going to get solar panels and electric cars and battery systems, and it's all going to be fine. That's not true. The animal agriculture is probably the second leading cause, and it's mainly because of deforestation and methane emissions. Some people say it's the #1 cause. I'm not quite there yet. That there's, depends how you do the analysis. It's within the top 2 or 3 leading causes. Let's say that. We know it's more than all forms of transportation combined. Okay, and we know that we cannot stop. Even if we stop fossil fuels today, we will not stop global warming exceeding 2 degrees centigrade without dramatic reduction in our consumption of animal products. Deforestation, animal agriculture is the #1 cause, particularly in places like South America, in the Amazon rainforest. Now, if you go there, you ask, why are we losing Amazon rainforest at record levels, right? We lose about 1 acre every second. I snap my finger, we lose about 1 acre of Amazon rainforest, and 80 to 90% of that is to make land for grazing cows or to grow soybeans for cows. So worldwide, animal agriculture is the leading cause of deforestation. Now we're destroying our biosphere as well. What's the biosphere? It's all the creatures that inhabit the Earth with us. Every day we lose about 100 species, and this is because when we tear down forests and we tear down natural ecosystems, we kill all the animals that live in those ecosystems. And so animal agriculture is the leading cause of the biodiversity crisis. And the same with the biodiversity crisis in the ocean. Okay, we are losing we've lost about 90% of large marine species, and we're fated to lose the rest of them potentially by 2050 if we don't change. Okay? I want to give you another staggering statistic that I recently learned. Let's say, got ahead of myself. Let's say you take all the mammals that are on planet Earth, okay, and you sort them. You say your cows here, your chickens aren't mammals. So the cows, your elephants, your donkeys, you sort them by species, and then you weigh them out. And then you see what the proportions are. This is what you would see. You would see 36% of that, because we are mammals, after all, is humans. 60% is our cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats. What does that leave? It leaves 4%. All the wild mammals that still exist. This is the bears, the elephants, the lions, the tigers, the wolves, the beavers, the squirrels, all within 4%. So more than anything, this chart to me shows we are squeezing nature into oblivion. And who's doing it? It's our livestock addiction. It's our addiction to raising these animals. What's that? Insects probably outnumber all of it, yeah. I don't have a statistic on that, but I know they're very numerous compared to other species. In weight, I'm not sure. Yeah. And we see a similar thing with birds. Birds are the most populous of the animals that we farm. Typically chickens, ducks, and chickens and turkeys, but mainly chickens. If you were to weigh all the bird species and sort them out, you would see 70% of the birds remaining on Earth are domesticated animals for consumption. 30% are all the wild animals, and we're losing them at a remarkable rate. Water scarcity. Where are we using all the water? We're told when we have a drought, take shorter showers, right? We're told, don't water your lawn, get drought-tolerant irrigation. Do you know that's only 5% of all US water use? You know 55% of US water use is to grow food for animals? So really, we should be talking about, if we want to save water, it's what you eat and what you drink. It's not how many times you take a shower. No? And manure pollution. We talked about all these animals we feed. You know, they generate an enormous amount of manure. And they generate 20 times more waste products than the human population of the United States. And when you and I flush the toilet, we have very good laws, sanitation laws, where that goes to a treatment center, and it gets filtered and disinfected and screened and sanitized, and we make sure that doesn't get back into the environment where it can make people sick. With the animal pollution, 20 times that, we don't have any laws to regulate how it's treated. It's kept in open cesspools that are eventually drained and dumped onto farmland. They end up in our rivers and our streams and our oceans, and they cause enormous damage. Okay? To keep the animals the way we do in these filthy, stinking hellhole factories, the only way they can survive long enough to make the slaughter is if we dose them with antibiotics. And so it turns out the majority of the antibiotics we use, 80%, are not on for human medical use. They're for farm animals, to keep farm animals alive long enough to reach slaughter weight. And what problem can this lead to? What problem does overusing antibiotics when you don't need them lead to? Antibiotic resistance, right? And we are seeing it. We are so foolish and reckless. We use some of the same drugs that we use to cure human disease, we use them on these farms. And we're seeing these drugs, they don't work anymore, right? Why is that? It's pretty obvious, we know, but we keep doing it, we keep doing it. And similarly, pandemics. Now, pandemics are viral, right? Antibiotic resistance is related to bacteria. But 3 out of 4 pandemics start in animals before they jump to humans. And when we farm animals in these factories where you have thousands of animals living in their waste, it is an incubator for disease. It's a petri dish. And so it is almost certain we will see a pandemic. And have you heard of the bird flu issue? Bird flu has raged for the last 2 years, has decimated several hundred million birds across the country. And now it's jumped to cows. And it has jumped to humans. And the only thing it hasn't evolved the ability is to jump from human to human yet. Once it does that, we have the next COVID on our hands. And so we're playing with fire the way we raise animals. Okay? Let's talk about world hunger. Every day, 25,000 people die of hunger in the United States. You know, we talk about the wars where we have, like in Gaza, 42,000 people have died, which is horrible and tragic. We have 25,000 people dying of hunger every day, but we don't talk about it, right? We have 800 million people who don't have enough food to eat. We don't talk about it. How do we justify growing enough food to feed 80 billion farm animals a year? The problem for world hunger is not that we don't have enough food or that we don't grow enough food, it's that it's not allocated properly. So there are literally people in poor, starving countries who are sending their grain overseas to fatten cattle so we can eat beef. How do we justify? How do we look at these starving children and say that we grew enough food to feed everybody, but sorry, I need my steak, I need my hamburgers, so you don't get to eat today? That literally is what we are doing. And we talked a little about this, but we are emptying our oceans. 90% of large marine species have disappeared. We are so reckless, we treat it like it's an infinite supply. So we throw back 40% of what we catch. It's called bycatch, discarded. And we're feeding all the remnants, all the fish that we don't want to eat that we catch, we feed them to cows, chickens, and pickens. So it's just a super inefficient system, and the oceans are going to be empty if we keep going. So the idea, when you go to a store, you go to Whole Foods, sustainable seafood. 5 minutes, okay. What do you guys think of this? Have you heard of climate-friendly coal? Do you think it exists? No, it doesn't. Okay, just because you put a label on it doesn't make it real. What do you think of these labels? Just because you put a label on it doesn't make it meaningful. It's the same thing. You see these in the store, they make people feel good. They really have very little meaning, especially in terms of the environment. In many cases, they're worse for the environment. So don't fall for it. This is greenwashing. Okay. Down to 5 minutes. We have time for questions after that? Okay. So I'm going to rush through this a little bit. We all have this fantasy growing up of old McDonald's farm. We think the animals, we sing songs, we think the animals have a wonderful life, they're treated well. Nobody ever talks about the slaughterhouse, right? There are no songs we sing about slaughterhouses. So why is that? We want to have this fantasy that animals are treated well. Nobody wants to think about animals being killed, but the fact is every animal we farm, unless they die on the farm, they end up in a slaughterhouse. Okay? That's the cruel reality. When you go to the store, the marketing emphasizes what we want to see. The reality is far different. Most of you know this. More than 99% of animals are raised in concentrated animal feeding operations, where the norm is to treat them like commodities, like units of production, not treated like the beloved companion animals that we all share at home. Okay? So the practices on these farms are incredibly cruel. I'm sure many of you know about these things. But animals are, all sorts of mutilations are done to them with no painkillers, et cetera. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you can imagine it's really horrific. Okay? Dairy and eggs, I don't know if any of you are consuming dairy and eggs. They are two of the most cruel of practices. Okay? Dairy involves, we are taking the milk that a mother makes for her calf. And so it involves forced impregnation and stealing of the calf from the mother so we can take the milk. And many people aren't aware of this, so I'm just mentioning this in case you haven't heard of this. And eggs involves the disposal of all the unwanted male chicks. So all of the industries, when you commodify these animals, result in an incredible cruelty. Okay. Here's the good news. We have one thing we can do, which is a simple solution to many problems. We don't have to convince industry or executives. We don't have to convince politicians. We don't need to spend a lot of money. We don't need to invent machines that suck carbon out of the atmosphere. We have them. They're called trees. We just need to grow them. And we make this choice 3 times a day, which is incredibly powerful, which is what you put on your plate. The simple tool you can solve the world's problems with is your fork. More good news, eating plant-based is good for you. We know you can get all the protein you need because world-class athletes these days are fully vegan. And the myth that we've been told that you need dairy for calcium is a lie. Where do cows get calcium from? It's all the green plants they eat. So you can get all the calcium you need from eating green plants. So what can any one of us do? It is super simple. Eat plant-based whenever possible. Do you have to be perfect? It'd be nice if you can go vegan. If that sounds like too much, start in small steps. Most people don't go vegan overnight. Green leafy vegetables. Green leafy vegetables. Yep. If you're not ready to go vegan, start in small steps, and I'll give you a few ideas, okay? One, can you do 1 meal a day vegan? That's very doable for most people. How about, oatmeal with almond milk, right? Or a falafel sandwich for lunch, or a burrito, a bean and rice burrito. Or choose 2 days a week to go plant-based, or make a schedule that works for you. Just approach it incrementally. If you're drinking cow's milk, try to explore the plant-based milks. There's so many wonderful options out there. You absolutely don't need, nobody needs to be drinking cow's milk unless you're a baby calf. I don't see any baby calves here. So you'll all be fine drinking plant-based milk, get all the calcium you need. A lot of these are fortified with calcium as well. When you go out, if you normally ignore the page that says vegetarian options, give it a try. You may be surprised how delicious the options are there. And try plant-based meats and cheeses. They're getting better all the time. Some people think this is artificial or too processed, but if you really look at the way meat's produced, you would be horrified. If you look at the way these are produced, you would think, okay, that looks pretty normal. So these foods, they're not over-processed. I wouldn't call them health foods, but if you're craving the taste of meat, these are perfectly good substitutes. Way better for you and the environment. If you're cooking or baking, use the internet. You can veganize anything, any recipe. And finally, teach your family and friends about these issues, because we're not going to change the world just by changing ourselves. We need to change those around us, and I think education is a great way to start to do that. So I'm going to finish with this slide. Sorry for a little bit over. Albert Einstein's one of my heroes. He was not vegan or vegetarian all of his life, but he went towards vegetarianism at the end of his life because he realized how unsustainable this would be. And he has a quote: "Nothing will benefit human health and the future and increase the chances of survival for humankind as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." So I'll leave you with that, and I have a few minutes for questions. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Mohan. That was amazing. I particularly like how you framed the issue with the planetary boundaries. I haven't seen that done before, and I thought it was really effective. We have time for some questions, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll come to you. Okay, I'll start here.
Yeah, for the milk substitutes, I noticed you didn't show almond milk. So is that because almond uses a lot of water also in, cultivating it?
Almond does use a lot of water, but it uses half as much as dairy milk. So compared to dairy milk, almond is definitely way better. Almonds also don't generate methane. They're a carbon sink. Cows generate methane, and you don't have to make an almond pregnant. So there's a lot of benefits to almond milk over dairy milk. That said, if you're concerned about water use, then soy milk and oat milk are much lower water than almonds. No. Yeah.
Going back to that 10% rule, is that a compounded 10%? In other words, the second level is 1/100th of the energy remains?
That's correct, yeah. Every step you take up the food chain, you lose 90% of the food energy. And so you go 2 steps, there's 100th. That's why we have tons of little herbivore animals, rodents and squirrels, and we don't have as many apex predators, because a healthy ecosystem can't sustain the energy's lost 90% as you go up, right? You don't have as many bears as we have squirrels, right?
What steps should we take to get government intervention in place and policy changes so that we can actually make these changes?
Great question. Government is one of the hardest things to influence because there's so many factors, industry and donations, and I tend to think we should focus on grassroots, changing people first, because if we change people, we change consumer demand, and markets will adapt to that. At the same time, there are politicians out there. Cory Booker is a vegan, for instance. So if you find a politician who's receptive, teach them about this, because most politicians don't know how serious this issue is. And so those who are open to education, educate them. Cory Booker was not vegan, but then he became vegan, and now he's pushing for a lot of progressive policies in the Farm Bill and things like that. So educate the ones you can, but focus on grassroots. Educate the people around you. Yeah.
I had a non-vegan friend ask me this question, which I didn't know really how to answer. So with respect to the displaced farmers who, that's their livelihood and they're poor, how as a society or community would we help take care of them?
Great question. We can transition all of them to farming vegetables or farming plant-based products, right? We still need people to farm food. We can change what they farm, what they grow. So for instance, have you heard of Measure J in Sonoma County? So there's a bill on the ballot that's going to be voted on in a few weeks in Sonoma County, which is north of San Francisco. And it's a bill to close down some of the large animal farms. And part of that bill is to retrain those farmers to grow things like mushrooms or soybeans or vegetables. And so the government, if we got the government active in this movement, we could get them to incentivize farmers or disincentivize them from growing animal products and incentivize them to grow plant-based products. And that's what we need to do politically, I think. Also, a lot of subsidies. The government currently sends a lot of subsidies, billions of dollars, to grow corn and soybeans to feed animals. We need to redirect those to grow fruits and vegetables and plant-based proteins for humans. Yeah.
I have a question for you. So I was really interested to know more about the work you've done in Mountain View, if you could summarize that. I know we have just a few minutes left.
Sure. So I live south of here, about 30 minutes, in a town called Mountain View. And in 2019, they came up with a sustainability plan. How are we going to make the town more sustainable? And everything in that sustainability plan talked about building electrification and electrifying the transportation. So I looked at that, and knowing what I know, I said, that's not nearly enough. And so I started going to city council meetings and giving short talks about we're ignoring the elephant in the room, which is animal agriculture. And in addition to, we need to do these things. We need to reduce our transportation emissions and reduce our building emissions, but we can't ignore this. And so I went to 4 or 5 city council meetings. I met with city council members. And so in the sustainability plan, now we have allocated some money to educate the community about the importance of plant-based eating. So we have, it's not a lot of money, it's $30,000. But the city created a website, they put out newsletters and recipes, and they have speaker events and things like that. So they're trying to, slowly increase awareness of these issues in our town. Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. If anyone else wants to ask Mohan a question, we have one over here.
How can we make the environment issues, plural, all of them, a little more salient in this direction, and to convince somebody who's undecided or on the fence that saving the planet is a good long-term goal, and being optimistic about being able to save the planet? How do we get this issue to the level of immigration and grocery expenses?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer, but I think, unfortunately, humans, probably because of our evolution, we are short-term thinkers. We don't think about the long term. We look at the problems that are right in front of us. We don't think about what's going to happen a year, 2 years, a decade, a generation out. So it's an uphill battle, but the only thing I can think of is to talk about it with people. When it comes to veganism, I think sharing things through documentaries, talks like the one I'm giving, sharing literature, websites with people, keeping it in the conversation, because unless we keep bringing it back to people, they're not going to talk about this. What's that? It's too far into the future, right? So those of us who have the awareness, I think it's sort of our responsibility to bring this to other people, and eventually, we may be forced by factors like, unfortunately, war and resource shortages and food shortages to really face this. I hope we don't get to that point, right? But the water, I know. We're draining all the aquifers, and majority of that's going towards growing food to feed animals. And most people aren't aware of that. So tell people about that, right? Talk about it. There's some great documentaries out there. Cowspiracy, Eating Our Way to Extinction is an excellent documentary. If any of you haven't seen Eating Our Way to Extinction, I highly recommend it. But educate those around you. This can spread virally if we keep doing that, right? I calculated if each of us educates 3 people a year and makes them go vegan, and they do 3 people and 3 people, 21 years the whole world can be vegan. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mohan. Thank you for leaving us with that inspirational thought. And I'm now going to invite